What if healing from shame isn't about getting rid of it? What if it's about learning not to believe everything it tells you? Have you ever noticed that even when you know a thought isn't true, part of you still believes it? Have you ever recognized a self-limiting belief only to find yourself falling back into the same pattern days later? What if the reason some stories are so difficult to change is because they aren't just beliefs? What if they're shame stories? Stories you've been carrying for years. Stories that have quietly shaped the way you see yourself, your relationships, and what's possible for your life. Today, we're talking about how to begin rewriting those stories because awareness is powerful, but awareness alone doesn't create change. That's what we're exploring today on Lessons of the Journey.
Every lesson is a lyric in the universal song. Oh, the lessons of the journey, I'll weave them in my song.
Welcome back to Lessons of the Journey, the Real Life Playbook. I'm Coach Nicole, here with Coach Jen. Over the last 2 episodes, we've explored what shame is and the stories it creates. Stories like, I'm not enough, I'm too much, I don't belong, or I have to earn love. And for many people, simply recognizing those stories can be eye-opening. You start seeing how shame has been influencing your thoughts, your behaviors, and the way you relate to yourself. But awareness naturally leads to a new question. Now what? How do you stop a story you've been carrying for years? How do you challenge a narrative that feels like part of your identity? How do you rewrite a story you've repeated so many times that it feels true? One of the biggest misconceptions about healing is the idea that awareness alone creates change. Awareness is absolutely essential, but awareness is not the finish line. It's the starting point. Because once you recognize a shame story, you have a choice. You can continue treating it as truth, or you can begin questioning it. And that process of questioning, challenging, and rewriting is where healing begins. Today, we're going to explore what that process looks like and why self-compassion, curiosity, and connection are often far more powerful than self-criticism when it comes to creating lasting change.
Oh boy, this is the worst part for me because I've cultivated awareness over the course of so many years. And I just inside of myself think that once I become aware of the thing that's been the problem, then, oh, snap of the fingers. Now it's fixed. It should just get better. And then it's not. And I get so pissed off that I've done all this work to identify it. And now it's identified. So it should shift, and it doesn't. That's where the work begins. Just like Nicole
We got
said.
you, Jen. We got you.
All right. So before we talk about how to rewrite those shame stories, it's important to understand why they can feel so difficult to change in the first place. If you've listened to our previous episodes on self-limiting beliefs, you may be noticing some overlap. And that's because most self-limiting beliefs are rooted in shame stories. Think of shame stories as the roots and self-limiting beliefs as the branches. The shame story says, I'm not enough. The self-limiting belief says, I'll never be successful. The shame story says, I don't belong. The self-limiting belief says, people won't accept me. The shame story says, I have to earn love. The self-limiting belief says, my needs don't matter. Not all self-limiting beliefs come from shame. Some come from fear, lack of experience, or inaccurate assumptions. But shame-based beliefs tend to be different because they aren't just beliefs about what we can do. They're beliefs about who we are. They're connected to worthiness, identity, belonging, and that's why they can feel so persistent. When we're only looking at the belief, we are often addressing a branch. But when we identify the shame story underneath it, we are finally looking at the root. That's where the deeper healing begins.
All right. Here's something we all need to understand before we go any further. The goal isn't to never experience shame again. Just like the goal isn't to never experience fear or disappointment, grief, rejection, or uncertainty. We are human. Difficult emotions are part of the human experience. And one of the reasons people get stuck is because they believe healing means reaching a point where these emotions never show up again. But that's not how healing works. Healing doesn't remove your humanity. It changes your relationship with your experience. So think about it. Most of us have spent years trying to get rid of uncomfortable emotions. We distract ourselves from them. We suppress them. We judge ourselves for having them. Or we convince ourselves we should be further along by now. Not talking to you, Jen.
Thanks, Nicole.
But what if the goal isn't to eliminate shame? What if the goal is to recognize it when it shows up and respond differently? Because shame will often continue to knock on the door. The difference is that you no longer have to invite it in and let it take over the house. You no longer have to hand it the microphone and allow it to narrate your life. Mm-hmm. You can notice it, acknowledge it, get curious about it without automatically believing everything it has to say. That's what changing your relationship with shame looks like. It's the difference between feeling an emotion and allowing that emotion to define your identity. Because when shame goes unexamined, it often becomes part of how we see ourselves. The story becomes, I am not enough. I am broken. I don't belong. And over time, those stories stop feeling like opinions and start feeling like facts. But when shame is observed, something shifts. Instead of becoming identity, it becomes information. Information about a wound, information about a fear, information about a story that may need compassion, understanding, or healing. And that's a very different relationship. Because healing isn't the absence of shame. It's the ability to recognize when shame is speaking and choose whether it deserves authority over your life. And the more aware we become of those moments, the more freedom we create between what shame says and what we choose to believe. I believe we could end the podcast right there because that is the goal.
Mic drop. Done. Yes, but how do we do all these things? Oh my gosh. Okay. So the reason people come to coaching, it's, gosh, all this stuff happens in my human experience. I just don't know what to do with it or how to do something with it. So we sit and we develop the tools. And like Nicole said, it's not that you're never going to have these things again. It's that you develop the tools to then do something with them. You pull out the tools from your tool belt when you're feeling X or Y or Z, and you go, oh, I can handle this a little bit better because of what Nicole just said. It's good stuff.
That is the hardest hurdle for me, is realizing I cannot eliminate things.
Yeah, we as humans, we don't like to feel uncomfortable. So we push these things away and never do anything with them. And I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's Pema Chodron. She's an American-born Tibetan Buddhist. And essentially, she talks about nothing will ever leave you until you've learned the lesson that it was meant to teach you. Yeah. That's what I've really recognized in my own life is the shame. I have been trying to push it away, push it away, push it away. First of all, was it mine to begin with? Secondly, if I invite it in and don't let it take over the room, like you said, but I talk with it and figure out what it is, well, now it doesn't own me. Now we can all move along in our energy. One of the simplest and most powerful things you can do is identify that story. It's not the emotion, it's the story. Because most of us don't just experience shame, we become fused with it. We stop seeing it as something we're experiencing and start seeing it as who we are. So instead of saying, I'm not enough, you might try saying, I'm noticing a story that says I'm not enough. Or instead of I don't belong, you could try, I'm carrying a belief that I don't belong. Or one of my favorite phrases from Brené's work is, the story I'm telling myself is. The story I'm telling myself is that I'm failing. The story I'm telling myself is that nobody understands me. The story I'm telling myself is that if I make a mistake, people will think less of me. Now, when you hear that, you go, oh, it's a story. It's not who I am. And this isn't about denying reality or pretending that hard things aren't happening. It's about recognizing that there is a difference between an event and the meaning we assign to that event. A mistake is an event. Because I made a mistake, I am a failure is a story. Rejection is an event. I was rejected because I'm not worthy is the story. Conflict is an event. This conflict means I don't belong is the story. Often we move from the event to the story so quickly that we don't even realize we're doing it. And the story feels like truth. But when we slow down and say, the story I'm telling myself is, something changes. We create that separation. And that separation is super powerful. Because the moment you identify a story as just a story, you then get to become the observer rather than the story itself. You get to step outside of it just enough to examine it, to question it, to get curious about it. You get to ask, where did this come from? Is this objectively true? Would I say this to someone I love? That's a big one. What evidence supports this? What evidence challenges it? And maybe most importantly, is this story helping me grow or is it keeping me stuck? Because stories have power. We've created our lives based on stories. The stories we repeat become the lens through which we see ourselves in our lives. But awareness gives us the opportunity to decide whether a story deserves to keep shaping our future. And that's why this practice is so powerful. It's not because it immediately changes the story, but because it changes your relationship with the story. Instead of becoming the story, you become the person observing it. And from that place, you finally have a choice. You can continue believing it, or you can begin writing a different story.
Oof, yes. One of the most common responses to shame is actually more shame.
Oh, yeah.
So we judge ourselves for struggling. We criticize ourselves for still carrying the story. We get frustrated that we haven't moved past it already. And before we know it, we've created a second layer of suffering. Now we're not just carrying shame. We're ashamed that we're carrying shame.
So true.
It's the adult Dr. Seuss book. Someone should write that. But what if instead of judging the story, we became curious about it? Because curiosity asks different questions. Instead of what's wrong with me, curiosity asks, where did this story come from? When did I first start believing it? What experiences reinforced it? What was happening in my life when this story first began to make sense? And perhaps one of the most important questions, what was the story trying to do for me? At first, that question can feel strange because most people don't think of shame stories as protective. They think of them as harmful, and often they are. But many shame stories began as adaptations, as attempts to make sense of experiences that felt confusing, painful, overwhelming, or unsafe. For example, if a child grows up in an environment where mistakes are met with criticism, they may develop the story, I have to be perfect. Not because it's true, but because perfectionism feels safer than rejection. If someone repeatedly experiences abandonment, they may develop the story, I have to earn love. Not because love should be earned, but because that story creates a sense of control. If someone is told they're too emotional, too sensitive, or too much, they may learn to hide parts of themselves. Not because those parts are wrong, but because belonging feels essential to survival. The story wasn't created because you were weak. The story was created because your mind was trying to help you navigate something difficult. The challenge is that survival strategies often outlive their usefulness. What protected us at one stage of life can begin limiting us at another. A belief that helped us avoid pain at 10 years old may keep us from experiencing connection at 40 or 50 years old. And this is where curiosity becomes so powerful, because when we understand the purpose a story once served, we can stop treating it like an enemy. We can appreciate the role it played without allowing it to continue running our lives. Instead of asking, what's wrong with me for having this story? We begin asking, does this story still serve me? Is it helping me become who I want to be? Or is it time to thank it for what it tried to do and choose something different? Because healing doesn't happen when we wage war against ourselves. Healing happens when we understand ourselves well enough to choose a new path.
So much, yes. A tool that I use with myself regularly, a tool that I use with my clients regularly. What agreement is no longer serving us? Everything you said, Nicole, is what we begin asking. Clearly, this is not serving you anymore, but we can't just abandon the old agreement. We have to go back, thank it for what service it provided us. And that's the part, you're exactly right, where people go, what are you talking about? This is inhibiting my life now. Yeah, but it served a purpose before, and we have to thank it for doing what it did. Now we're ready to replace it. And that's such a beautiful thing.
Yes.
When many people hear the phrase self-compassion, they immediately think it means being easy on yourself, which is why I never understood what anybody was saying when they said it to me for my whole life. We think it means lowering the bar or making excuses or avoiding accountability. But actually, that's not what self-compassion is. Self-compassion is the ability to respond to your own struggles with the same understanding, encouragement, and perspective you would offer someone you care about. So let's think about it. If a friend came to you after making a mistake, would your first response be, well, of course you failed. What's wrong with you? You should have known better. That was dumb. Would you say that to your bestie? Probably not. Most of us naturally offer other people a level of grace that we do not extend ourselves. We remind them that one mistake doesn't define them, that setbacks are part of growth, that being human means getting things wrong sometimes. But when the mistake is something that we did, the conversation changes. And that's where self-compassion becomes so important. It's not about removing accountability. It's about removing the unnecessary suffering we add on top of accountability. Because there is a difference between learning from a mistake and becoming the mistake. There is a difference between saying, I made a poor decision and I'm a failure. One creates an opportunity for growth. The other creates an identity wound. According to researcher Dr. Kristin Neff, self-compassion is associated with greater resilience, emotional well-being, and a stronger ability to learn from setbacks. So that just said, you guys are better for being nicer to yourselves. So let's do that. And that's not because compassionate people avoid responsibility. It's because they're able to face really hard truths without turning those truths into evidence of their unworthiness. Self-compassion doesn't ask us to ignore our mistakes. It asks us to stop using them as proof that we're broken, bad, or undeserving of our own kindness.
This is the other biggest lesson for me, is how to show myself self-compassion.
Yeah.
And this is, I know I've been working on that one for a while. I want to talk about this. One of Brené Brown's most powerful findings is that shame thrives in secrecy, silence, and judgment. Shame wants to stay hidden. It wants you to believe you're the only one struggling, the only one failing, the only one who feels this way, because isolation gives shame power. Connection weakens it. That doesn't mean sharing your deepest wounds with everyone. It means finding safe, trusted people who can hold your story without reinforcing your shame. Because sometimes the most healing words we hear are "me too," or "you're not alone." So powerful.
So powerful. I think that's why you and I are the way we are, Nicole. I talk about everything because I know that of 8 billion people in this world, I cannot possibly be the only one. And I cannot sit in the shame that I'm feeling when I'm feeling it. So I talk about it. I'm looking for those people that can identify with it, because those people were too afraid to say it out loud, and they needed me to be the one to say it. So they can say, oh, me too, or I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
We have those mouthpieces and we use them. And I'm so thankful for people like you, because others need somebody to be the first one to say it. And connection, I just love that you brought that up. Thank you for that.
I think it's both sides. I say it because I never want anyone to feel alone. That's very much a thing for me. I'm a very inclusive person. It's also, I say it because I want someone to say, oh yeah, me too. So I can be like, yep, I'm not alone. Because I knew I wasn't alone, but my body always needs the evidence, which we really talked about last episode.
Speaking of evidence, one of the reasons shame stories feel so convincing is because we've spent years collecting evidence for them. If I believe I'm not enough, I notice every mistake, every setback, every flaw, every rejection, every time I felt dumb in a conversation with somebody. But what if we intentionally looked for evidence that challenges that story? What evidence suggests you're more capable than you think? What evidence suggests you belong? What evidence suggests you're worthy of love even when you're imperfect? The goal isn't forced positivity. The goal is a more complete picture, because shame tends to focus on selective evidence and healing requires expanding the lens.
I love that. Expanding the lens. Yes. Evidence. One of the most important things to understand is that healing doesn't mean pretending the old story never existed. Many people spend years trying to get rid of shame, trying to eliminate it, trying to make it disappear. But healing often looks less like erasing a story and more like changing your relationship with it. Isn't it funny how this all comes back to the relationship you have with all of the things? I feel like that's always our conversation. It's the relationship you have with yourself, the relationship you have with your nervous system, the relationship you have with your shame. Now, the story may still show up, but the difference is you no longer automatically believe it. You recognize it, you acknowledge it, and you choose whether it deserves authority over your life. That's growth, not the absence of the story, but the ability to respond differently when it appears.
Yes, respond differently. Everybody knows this. What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting something different. But you just said it. When you're aware and then you respond differently when it shows up, you're no longer insane. Whether you did the right thing or not is neither here nor there. If we keep responding to it the same way, it's just going to continue to reinforce that story that we're looking to get out of. You're brilliant.
It's not me. The researchers are brilliant.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, we have a challenge for y'all. This week, identify one shame story you've been carrying. Write it down. Then write these words in front of it. I'm noticing a story that says. Then ask yourself, what evidence supports this story? What evidence challenges it? And what would I do differently if I no longer believed it was true? You don't have to rewrite the entire story this week. Just begin questioning whether it deserves to keep writing your next chapter.
That's awesome. What would I do differently?
Yeah. You've heard this question. What would you do if you knew you could not fail?
It's on my fridge.
It's a very similar question.
I love that question. Yeah, because really we can do what we want. My takeaway is I have been through so many interesting experiences in my life. And I would say until I hit my 40s, I really thought that a lot of my shame was because I had never been successful enough. I'm just being completely honest here. Then I moved to Hawaii. I had a very successful coaching business. I had the success, but I still had the same shame. I started to realize that nothing I did as far as success or goalpost things, the term we used last week, which I loved, the goalpost would always move, always. I had to work on my relationship with my shame. And it really is about relationships.
Yeah.
And I always say clarity is power, but it really and truly is. When you clearly understand that you will never get rid of the shame, but you can change your relationship and your communication with it, the clarity arrives. And I feel like I've been there and I've had that clarity and I love that. And understanding self-compassion, I love the way you put it, because self-compassion is not adding that extra layer of suffering. That is so important. I always need to hear this. The shame episodes or something I'll have to listen to every couple months just to remind myself, little better, little better, little better.
Yeah, because it is such a normal human experience and it's really an isolating feeling. This is my favorite episode ever because it is so true for everyone. And because I've lived it and because I'm currently working on it, and I know you are, and I know we all are, it is so necessary to talk about because Brené Brown, it lives in isolation. And one of my favorite things to think about is that if you recognize that your past, and in this case, we're talking about shame, when we realize that that is just a story, it can no longer have control over us, because it's just like reading your kids a storybook at night. You close the book, it's done. It doesn't exist anymore. So if we can think about our shame and our stories like that, it can't affect us anymore because it's a closed book. We can pick it up, we can look at it, and we can move on because it's just a story at this point. This hits home for me because it's been a lifelong thing of me recognizing that my whole life was just stories that I created based on perception. And it terrifies me for my children growing up.
They're going to have their own stories, though.
Yes.
Because that's part of the journey. How to relate to the stories is what we have to teach them.
That's the biggest takeaway, is that when you have a relationship with it, instead of creating the essence that it is you, then you can look at it from a distance, and shift is so much more possible when you have that distance. So good.
Yeah. Honestly, this is the first time for me that it's been actually phrased this way, is the relationship you have with shame. And I like the phrasing that was in today's episode. It really helps me grasp it. Maybe it's just the words. You're the word person. It's the words that work for Nicole.
Yeah. That's exactly it. You've probably heard something tiptoeing around these words for years, and not until those words come together in the way that makes sense for you at that time.
The power is in creating a relationship with my shame. Maybe I heard it before, but I wasn't ready to hear it. Yeah.
Yeah. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yes.
I've been on this journey for a long time. I've been confronting shame, insecurity, these stories that I've been telling myself, and they've been controlling who I believed that I was.
Yeah.
And I'm like, nope, you don't get to control me anymore. I get to decide what this looks like. And it's so empowering.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I love that.
In the vein of what we're talking about, Nicole, my question, I'm interested.
All right.
Would you rather be able to have one conversation with your future self or one conversation with your past self?
Future.
Why?
Because I don't want to change my trajectory in any way, shape, or form. Because I love where I'm at, but I also would like to have a conversation with my future self to see what my journey was like from here until there. I think that is the most interesting part. I know what happened in the past. I mean, I know people talk about, oh, I'd like to go back and tell my young self, blah, blah, blah. I believe in the butterfly effect. I think if you tell your younger self something, you could change your trajectory. And I would not want to mess with anything in my world right now. I want it to be where it is right now. But the future self could give me a glimpse into how I do and maybe propel myself forward at a little bit of a faster pace. Because, you know, I want to be done with all this shit tomorrow.
Yes, I know. Me too.
And yet I'm very aware that I cannot, but a girl can dream. Yeah.
Nice.
My question for you, Jen, is what's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Oh, you've heard me say this before. The best advice I have ever gotten, and it saved my life, was when I found out that I had a bipolar diagnosis. And I consumed that diagnosis as though it was all of who I was and would ever be. And I had a therapist at that time, and it was a new diagnosis. I was really taking it in, like, yeah, I am bipolar. All of this evidence tells me that I am. She said, you are not bipolar. You have bipolar, and there is a difference. And that runs my life to this day. You have heard me say it before. I am writing a book. I have said it on stage. I am is the most powerful statement a human can make about themselves. We've had episodes on this, probably because I'm so passionate about it. That is the best advice ever. You are not something unless you decide that you are, especially a mental or a physical ailment. The way you speak life into yourself changes everything. If you believe you take on the essence of something, then yeah, you are. If you change the language surrounding your healing, I think that changes everything, just energetically. So that is most definitely the best advice I ever got. I tell you, it changed my whole world.
Sounds like it.
We have emotions. We have mental ailments. We have physical ailments. We have stuff. What we are, we get to decide to be. The relationship, as we've been talking about, the relationship with that language and what we decide to take on. Best advice ever.
Nice. I like that.
Thanks.
All right. In our final episode of this series, we're going to explore what it means to embrace our humanity, because healing isn't about becoming perfect. It's about learning to believe that you are worthy of love, belonging, and connection long before you earned any of it. We'll explore why so many of us spend our lives chasing worthiness and what becomes possible when we stop treating our imperfections as evidence against our value. If today's episode resonated with you, share it with someone who might need this reminder. And make sure you're following the podcast so you don't miss the final chapter of this series. Because next time, we're bringing everything together. The shame, the stories, the healing, and ultimately the truth that being human was never something you needed to earn. And that's where we'll finish this journey. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Write your lines with passion, let your spirit freely roam. The lessons of your journey will lead you safely